I walked into the supermarket, my old torn shirt clinging to my skin, just hoping to grab some food and get out. But the air shifted the moment I stepped inside. Eyes locked onto me, cold, judging, like I was something less than human. The security guard trailed me, his boots echoing too close. The cashier sneered at my clothes, loud enough for everyone to hear. People in line stared, some whispering, others smirking. Shame burned hotter than my hunger. That night, I realized unfairness hides in the places you least expect. This is how one trip to the store changed everything. My name's Daniel Chen, and I came to this country chasing a better life. Back home, I earned an engineering degree, spent years hunched over textbooks, dreaming of building something meaningful. But here, in this small Ohio town, I'm just a guy scraping by on a warehouse job that barely pays the bills. Rent eats most of my paycheck, and what's left goes to food, cheap stuff, like rice and canned beans. That's why the supermarket down the street became my lifeline. Every week, I'd walk those fluorescent-lit aisles, counting every cent, picking the bruised apples because they cost less. My clothes didn't help. My shirt, frayed at the collar and torn at the sleeve, screamed poverty. Old sneakers, scuffed and worn, didn't exactly shout success either. People noticed. Cashiers would glance at me, their eyes lingering a second too long. Shoppers would step aside, like I carried some kind of stain. It wasn't just the clothes. It was me, an Asian guy in a place where I never quite blended in. Still, I kept my head down, told myself it didn't matter. I'd worked hard to get here, left my family behind, and carried a quiet pride in my chest. That degree, even if it sat unused in a drawer, reminded me who I was. I wasn't invisible, no matter how they looked at me. Each trip to the store tested that belief though. I'd feel their stares, hear their whispers, but I'd grip my basket tighter and keep going. I had to eat, didn't I? Nobody was going to hand me anything, so I'd plan my trip carefully. Late evenings, when the store was quieter, less crowded. But even then, I couldn't escape the weight of their judgment. It wasn't just about buying food anymore. It was about proving I belonged, that I wasn't less than them. That's what I told myself anyway, as I stepped into the supermarket that night, not knowing it would be the last time I'd let them make me feel small. It was a muggy Thursday evening, and the supermarket buzzed with people. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor. I slipped inside, my worn-out sneakers squeaking faintly, my torn shirt sticking to my back from the summer heat. My basket held the usual: a loaf of day-old bread, a bag of rice, and a couple of carrots starting to wilt. I kept my eyes on the shelves, trying to ignore the weight of being watched. But I felt it. The cashier at the front, a middle-aged woman named Karen, according to her name tag, gave me a sharp glance as I passed. Her lips pursed, like she'd smelled something sour. I told myself to keep moving, to focus on getting out quick. Halfway down the cereal aisle, I noticed the security guard. He was a big guy, maybe 6 feet tall, with a radio crackling on his belt. He lingered at the end of the aisle, pretending to adjust a display, but clearly tracking me. His boots thudded closer each time I moved to the next row. My hands tightened around the basket's handle. I hadn't done anything wrong, just shopping, same as everyone else. But the air felt thick. like I was wading through suspicion. I grabbed a can of soup and headed toward the checkout, hoping to slip through unnoticed. The line was long, maybe 10 people deep. I stood there, clutching my basket, when I heard a woman behind me mutter to her friend, "Look at his shirt. Bet he's up to something." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Her friend snickered, and I felt my face burn. I stared at the floor, counting the scuff marks on the tiles, willing myself to stay calm. When it was my turn, Karen the cashier didn't even look at me at first. She scanned my items slowly, like it pained her to touch them. Then she spoke, loud enough for the whole line to hear. "You sure you can afford this? We don't do handouts here." My stomach dropped. People turned to stare, some curious, others with faint smirks. A man in a suit 2 spots back shook his head, like I'd confirmed some assumption. I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat felt dry. "I've got the money," I managed, my voice low but steady. Karen snorted, tossing my carrots into a bag like they were trash. The guard was closer now, standing just behind the register, his hand resting on his belt. I could feel every pair of eyes in that line boring into me, judging my torn shirt, my cheap groceries, my existence. It wasn't just a bad moment. It was a public shaming, and I was trapped in it. All I wanted was to buy my food and leave, but they'd turned me into a spectacle. The air in the supermarket felt heavier now, like it was pressing me into the floor. Karen, the cashier, slid my bag of rice across the scanner with a flick of her wrist, letting it thud against the counter. She didn't hand me the receipt. She just dropped it into the bag, her eyes avoiding mine like I was invisible. "Next," she called out, even though I was still standing there, fumbling with my wallet. The man behind me, the one in the suit, sighed loudly and checked his watch. I felt my hands shake as I pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and some coins, counting them carefully to make sure I had enough. Karen snatched the money, her nails clicking against the counter, and muttered something about people like you, holding up the line. I wanted to snap back, to tell her I was just buying groceries, same as her. But the words stuck in my throat. The line of shoppers kept staring. A woman with a toddler in her cart whispered to another, their eyes darting to my torn shirt. The kid pointed at me, and his mom shushed him, but not before I caught her smirk. Another guy, maybe in his 30s, leaned toward his body and said, "Bet he's got something stuffed in that shirt." My chest tightened. I hadn't stolen anything, never had, never would, but their words made me feel like I'd already been convicted. I glanced at the security guard, still hovering near the register. His name tag read Mike. He stepped closer, his hand brushing the radio on his belt, and said, "Let's see that bag." His voice was flat, but his eyes were hard, like he'd already decided I was guilty. I handed over the plastic bag with my bread and carrots, my heart pounding. Mike rummaged through it, pulling out each item like he was defusing a bomb. The bread got squashed under his grip. "Just checking," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The line went quiet, but I could feel their judgment, their certainty that I was exactly what they thought. A thief, a nobody, someone who didn't belong. I wanted to disappear. My face burned, and my hands clenched into fists in my pockets. I thought about my engineering degree, tucked away in a drawer at home, useless in this moment. I thought about my parents, who'd sacrificed everything to get me here, believing in a dream that now felt like a cruel joke. All I'd wanted was to buy some food, to make it through another week. But here I was, on display, my torn shirt a spotlight on my shame. I could have walked away, head down, like I always did. But something in me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet refusal to keep swallowing this. I looked at Mike, still holding my bag, and said, "I didn't take anything. You know that." My voice trembled, but it was clear. He shrugged, handing the bag back like it was nothing, but the damage was done. The shoppers were still watching, some nodding like they'd expected this all along. Karen rolled her eyes and started scanning the next person's items, dismissing me entirely. I stood there, gripping my bag, my mind racing. I wasn't just angry, I was tired. Tired of the stares, the whispers, the assumptions that my clothes, my face, my life made me less than them. I thought about every time I'd stayed silent, every time I'd let people like Karen or Mike make me feel small. I couldn't keep doing it. Not tonight. Not anymore. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I straightened my shoulders, even as my heart pounded, and took a step toward the exit. The crowd parted slightly, their eyes still on me, but I wasn't invisible anymore. I was done being their scapegoat. I stood frozen at the edge of the checkout lane, my plastic bag dangling from one hand, the weight of every stare pinning me in place. The supermarket's hum, scanners beeping, carts rattling, felt distant, like I was underwater. Karen had already moved on to the next customer, her fake smile back in place, while Mike, the security guard, lingered nearby, his radio crackling softly. The shoppers behind me didn't bother hiding their glances anymore. A woman in a red jacket nudged her husband, her lips forming words I couldn't hear but didn't need to. My torn shirt felt like a neon sign, screaming my poverty to everyone in that store. I could have walked out, let the moment swallow me like so many others had. But something inside me refused to bend this time. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against my phone. It was an old model, cracked screen and all, but it still worked. My hands were still shaking, but I pulled it out and opened the camera app. I didn't think too hard about it. I just pressed record. The lens caught Karen's smug expression as she handed change to the man in the suit. I turned slightly, capturing Mike leaning against the display, his eyes still locked on me like I might bolt with my 20-cent carrots. My voice was low, barely audible over the store's noise, but I spoke into the phone anyway. "This is what happens when you're poor and look like me," I said. "They treat you like a criminal for buying bread." My throat tightened, but I kept going. "Her name's Karen. She said I can't afford my groceries. He's Mike. He checked my bag for no reason." A few people noticed. The woman with the toddler froze, her eyes wide like she'd been caught. The man in the suit looked away, suddenly fascinated by his phone. I kept recording, panning slowly to show the line of shoppers, their faces a mix of discomfort and irritation. "They're all watching," I said, my voice steadier now. "They think I'm nothing because of this shirt, because of how I look." I didn't shout or make a scene. I just let the truth spill out, raw and unfiltered. My heart pounded, but it wasn't just shame anymore. It was something else, something fierce. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Hey, that's not right," a woman said, loud enough to cut through the chatter. She was maybe in her 40s, with short brown hair and a cart full of frozen dinners. Her name tag said Lisa, and she worked at the pharmacy counter across the store. She stepped out of line, her arms crossed. "I saw the whole thing. You didn't do anything wrong." Her words hit me like a lifeline. I turned the camera toward her, and she didn't flinch. "That cashier's being rude to plenty of people," she said. "And that guard? He picks on anyone who doesn't look rich enough." A few others in line shifted uncomfortably, but no one else spoke up. Still, Lisa's voice was enough to make me feel seen, like I wasn't alone in this fight. I stopped recording, my hands still trembling, but my mind clear. I looked at Karen, who was now glaring at me, her cheeks flushed. "You can't film in here," she snapped, but her voice wavered. Mike took a step forward, but Lisa cut in again. "He's not breaking any rules," she said firmly. "You're the ones making this a problem." I didn't wait for their response. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and headed for the exit. My bag of groceries clutched tight. The crowd parted, their stares less certain now, like I'd disrupted their script. Outside, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp. I leaned against the brick wall of the store, my breath uneven. I played the video back, watching the shaky footage of Karen's sneer, Mike's unnecessary search, the crowd's silent judgment. It wasn't just evidence, it was proof that I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the guy in the torn shirt anymore. I uploaded the video to my social media, my fingers hesitating over the post button. I didn't have many followers, just a few co-workers and old classmates, but I typed out a caption anyway. "This is what it's like to be treated like less than human for being poor. This happened tonight at my local supermarket." I hit post, not knowing what would come next, but feeling a spark of something new. I wasn't going to let them walk over me anymore. I had a voice, and I was going to use it. The moment I hit post, my stomach twisted with a mix of fear and relief. I sat on my couch in my cramped apartment, the glow of my phone lighting up the dim room. The video was out there now, raw and unpolished, showing Karen's sneer, Mike's pointless backcheck, and the crowd's judging stares. I didn't expect much, just a few likes from coworkers, maybe a comment or two. But by morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. I opened the app and saw the numbers climbing. 50 shares, then 100, then 500. People I didn't know were commenting, reposting, tagging others. "This is disgusting," one person wrote. "I've seen this happen at that store too," said another. My hands shook as I scrolled through the responses, a mix of anger and support pouring in from strangers across the city. By noon, a local blogger with a decent following had shared my video, calling it a wake-up call about everyday prejudice. Her post got traction, and soon a news outlet in Cleveland picked it up. They reached out, asking for an interview. I hesitated. Talking to a reporter felt like stepping into a spotlight I wasn't ready for. But then I thought about Karen's voice, sharp and loud, saying I couldn't afford my groceries. I thought about Mike's hands rifling through my bag for no reason. I said yes. The reporter, a woman named Emily, met me at a coffee shop near my apartment. She was kind but direct, asking about my life, my job, my background. I told her about my engineering degree, how I'd come to Ohio for a better future, but ended up stuck in a warehouse, barely making ends meet. I showed her the torn shirt I'd worn that night, still sitting in my laundry basket. It's not just about clothes, I said. It's about how they saw me, how they decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. Emily's article came out the next day, with a still from my video at the top, me holding my back, Mike looming nearby, Karen's scowl clear as day. The headline read, "Local man exposes bias in everyday spaces." It spread fast. People on social media started digging into the supermarket's history, sharing stories of rude cashiers, overzealous guards, and customers feeling targeted for their appearance. A woman posted about being followed in the same store because she was in sweatpants. A man said he'd been asked to prove he paid for his items because he looked sketchy. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a spark that lit up a bigger conversation. Soon, activists got involved. A local group focused on economic justice reached out, asking to meet. Their leader, a guy named Jamal, invited me to a community center where they were planning a response. I walked in nervous, expecting a room full of strangers to judge me, like the supermarket crowd had. Instead, they welcomed me. Jamal showed me posts from people across the country who'd seen my video, calling it proof of how poverty gets weaponized against people like me. They helped me organize my thoughts, turning my shaky footage into a clear message. This wasn't just one bad night. It was a pattern, a system that let people like Karen and Mike treat others like garbage because of how they looked. The supermarket's corporate office issued a statement by the end of the week, claiming they were investigating the incident. It felt hollow, like something they'd copied from a PR handbook. But the pressure didn't stop. A petition started circulating, demanding accountability and better training for employees. It gained thousands of signatures in days. Reporters dug deeper, finding out that the store had a history of complaints, mostly from low-income customers, many of them minorities. My video had cracked open a truth nobody could ignore. The store wasn't just a place to buy food. It was a stage where people like me were judged, humiliated, and dismissed. I got a call from a lawyer named Sarah, who worked pro bono for cases like mine. She explained that my video could be grounds for a formal complaint, maybe even a lawsuit. I wasn't sure about going that far. Suing felt big, scary, like something that could swallow me whole. But Sarah was patient, walking me through my options. She said the video showed clear discrimination, not just by Karen and Mike, but by the store's culture. They didn't just target you, she said. They banked on you staying quiet. That hit me hard. I'd spent so long keeping my head down, thinking silence was my only choice. Now, people were listening. The story kept growing. A national news outlet picked it up, airing a segment that included clips from my video. They interviewed Lisa, the pharmacy worker who'd spoken up for me. She told them she'd seen Karen act that way before, especially with customers who didn't look the part. Lisa became a small hero online, her words shared alongside mine. I reached out to thank her and we met for coffee. She told me she'd been scared to speak up, but couldn't stand watching me get humiliated. "You looked like you were carrying the whole world," she said. I nodded, my throat tight. She was right. As the weeks passed, more people shared their stories. A hashtag started trending, something like #no more shame, where people posted about being judged for their clothes, their accents, their skin. I read every post I could, feeling a strange mix of pain and hope. These weren't just stories, they were lives, people who'd felt the same thing I had. My video had given them a way to speak. I wasn't just Daniel Chen, the guy in the torn shirt. I was part of something bigger, something that could change how people saw each other. The supermarket wasn't the only problem. It was a symptom of a world that judged too quickly, that turned poverty into a crime. My degree, my dreams, my words, they'd been buried under that torn shirt for too long. Now they were starting to surface. The supermarket's corporate statement wasn't enough to quiet the storm. A week after my video went viral, I got an email from their regional manager, a woman named Patricia. She invited me to a meeting at their headquarters in downtown Cleveland. I almost didn't go. Part of me still wanted to stay small, to avoid the spotlight. But I thought about Lisa's voice cutting through the crowd, about the thousands of comments online from people who'd felt the same shame I had. I put on my best shirt, not the torn one, but a clean button-up I'd saved for job interviews, and drove to the meeting. The office was sleek, all glass and polished wood, a world away from the fluorescent chaos of the store. Patricia shook my hand, her smile tight but professional. She apologized, her words careful, saying the company was deeply sorry for my experience. I nodded, but I wasn't there for apologies. I wanted change. Sitting across from her was a lawyer from their team and a man named Greg, who introduced himself as head of employee training. They showed me a plan, mandatory sensitivity workshops for all staff, a review of security protocols, and a public statement acknowledging their failure. I listened, my hands folded in my lap, thinking about Mike's heavy stare and Karen's cutting words. "What about them?" I asked. Patricia hesitated, then said both had been suspended pending an investigation. A week later, I learned Karen had been fired for violating company policy, and Mike was reassigned to a non-customer-facing role. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could erase that night, but it felt like a step. The store also agreed to post signs about their non-discrimination policy, visible to every customer walking in. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter, like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the guy in the torn shirt. I was Daniel Chen, the man who'd spoken up. Back home, I checked my phone and saw the petition had hit 10,000 signatures. People weren't just angry, they were demanding better. The supermarket chain announced they'd partner with a local nonprofit to train staff on bias and economic discrimination. I got a call from Jamal, the activist I'd met at the community center. He said my story had pushed the city council to discuss protections for low-income residents in public spaces. It wasn't a law yet, but it was a start. The biggest change, though, was in me. I started carrying myself differently. At the warehouse, I spoke up when my supervisor tried to short my hours. I wasn't loud or aggressive, just firm, like I'd learned to be that night in the store. I even reached out to a few engineering firms, dusting off my resume for the first time in months. One offered me an interview, nothing fancy, but a chance to use my degree again. I didn't get the job, but the rejection didn't crush me like it would have before. I knew my worth now, not because of what I owned or wore, but because I'd stood up when it mattered. The online conversation kept growing. People sent me messages, thanking me for showing what they'd gone through. A woman from Toledo wrote about being followed in a store because she was in old clothes. A man from Columbus said he'd been accused of stealing just for carrying a backpack. Each story reminded me why I'd posted that video. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us who'd been made to feel less than human. I started replying to some of these messages, not with big speeches, but with simple words. I hear you. You're not alone. Those exchanges became my anchor, a reminder that my voice had power beyond that one night. The supermarket wasn't perfect after that. I went back a few weeks later, testing the waters. The new cashier, a young guy named Ethan, scanned my items without a word, his face neutral but polite. No one followed me down the aisles. The signs about respect and inclusion were up, just as promised. But I still saw a few familiar faces in the crowd, their eyes lingering a little too long. Change wasn't complete, and maybe it never would be. But I wasn't the same person who'd walked in months ago, head down, bracing for judgment. I held my bag of groceries with steady hands, paid, and walked out with my head up. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Not because they'd changed, but because I had. Months after that night in the supermarket, I found myself in a community center, standing in front of a small group of people. They were strangers, mostly, but their stories felt familiar. Humiliation in stores, workplaces, even on the street, all because of how they looked or what they couldn't afford. I'd started this group with Jamal's help, a place where people could share without fear. I wasn't a leader, not really, just someone who'd been through it and wanted others to know they weren't alone. I wore a new shirt that day, one I'd bought with my first paycheck from a part-time drafting job. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, no tears. Still, I kept that old torn shirt in a box at home. It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was a reminder of the night I found my voice. Life didn't transform overnight. I still worked at the warehouse, still counted every dollar for rent and groceries, but I carried myself differently now. When I walked into the supermarket, I didn't brace for stares. I'd nod at the new cashiers, some trained under the policies my video helped push through. The store wasn't perfect, change never is, but it felt less like a battlefield. I'd started posting more online, not videos of confrontations, but stories. Stories of people like me, like the woman who joined our group after being shamed for using food stamps, or the man who'd been followed in a hardware store for wearing worn-out boots. Each post reached more people, building a quiet network of voices that refused to stay silent. I got messages sometimes from people I'd never meet. A teenager in Michigan said my video gave her courage to call out a rude teacher. A father in Indiana thanked me for showing his son that poverty wasn't something to be ashamed of. Those words kept me going, especially on days when doubt crept in. I wasn't a hero, and I didn't want to be. I was just Daniel Chen, a guy with an engineering degree and a stubborn streak, trying to make sense of a world that judged too quickly. My group grew slowly, meeting every other week. We didn't solve everything, but we listened, and that was enough to start. Looking back, I realized that night in the supermarket didn't just change how others saw me, it changed how I saw myself. I still lived modestly, still ate cheap rice and bruised apples, but I wasn't ashamed anymore. My torn shirt, my accent, my story, they were mine, and they were enough. I knew now that one voice, even a shaky one, could ripple out, wake people up, make them question. I'd keep speaking, keep listening, keep building something better, one story at a time. Thank you all for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but knowing you're out there, hearing me, makes it worth it. This journey, standing up in that supermarket, facing the stairs, and finding my voice, changed how I see myself and the world. I hope it resonates with you, whether you've felt judged for how you look, what you wear, or where you come from. Your support, your stories, keep this fight alive, so I want to hear from you. Have you ever been treated unfairly because of your appearance or circumstances? What did you do to reclaim your dignity? How do we build a world where no one feels like they don't belong? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your experiences, or just let me know this story meant something to you. Together, we can keep pushing for change, one voice at a time.